Empty hands, Clara. Brielle Carson said it with a smile bright enough for the cameras and sharp enough to cut through the music. The words floated across the Meridian Hotel ballroom, over the white orchids, the crystal glasses, the 20-foot ceiling washed in gold, and landed on Clara Hayes like something everyone had been waiting for permission to notice. She had arrived alone, in a simple champagne dress that moved softly when she walked, with no diamond necklace at her throat, no man at her side, and no ring flashing under the chandeliers. Just her hands, folded neatly in front of her, bare and still. Around her, Grant Miller's wedding guests held their smiles behind champagne flutes. Some of them remembered Clara from before the money, before the private dinners, before Grant learned to say her name like an old address he had outgrown. Now he stood beside his new bride in a black tuxedo, polished, handsome, and silent. That silence was not new to Clara. It had sat between them at dinner tables, in attorney offices, in the last bedroom they ever shared as husband and wife. It had watched while he packed his expensive suits and told her they had become different people, as if she had not spent years helping him become the kind of man who could afford to leave. Brielle lifted her left hand, letting her oval diamond catch the light. "I just mean," she said, tilting her head with practiced innocence, "most people bring something to a wedding. A gift, a date, a little proof they moved on." A soft laugh traveled from table to table. It did not roar. It did not need to. Quiet cruelty fit better in rooms like this, where the napkins were folded like swans and every insult wore perfume. Clara looked at the bride's ring, then at Grant's face. He gave her the smallest warning with his eyes, as if she were the one embarrassing him, as if her presence alone had disturbed the perfect story he had purchased for the night. The band kept playing something slow and expensive near the marble staircase. A server paused with a silver tray, unsure whether to keep moving. Clara could feel every stare measuring her. Her empty hands, her quiet mouth, the pale mark on her finger, where a wedding ring had once rested for 9 years. She did not hide it. She did not make a fist. She simply breathed in, slow enough to hear the ice settle in a glass nearby. Brielle stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it uglier. "You were always graceful, Clara, even when losing." That was when Grant finally moved, but only to place a hand on Brielle's waist, claiming her, calming her, rewarding her. Clara saw it, and something inside her did not break. It finished breaking. She gave the smallest smile, not warm, not wounded, just unreadable. Because tucked inside her purse was a black velvet box no one in that ballroom had seen yet. And somewhere beyond those gold doors, Alexander Westbrook had just arrived. Clara had learned long ago that a room could become cruel without raising its voice. Standing beneath the chandeliers of the Meridian, with Brielle smiling in front of her and Grant pretending not to see the damage, she was carried backward by the smallest details. The smell of white roses became the smell of cheap coffee in their first apartment in Queens. The polished marble beneath her heels became the cracked kitchen tile where she used to stand barefoot at 2 in the morning, reading Grant's business proposals while he slept with one arm over his eyes, exhausted and convinced that success was only one meeting away. Back then, he did not own a tuxedo. He owned 2 suits, one navy and one gray, both pressed by Clara before every investor pitch. She packed his lunches in paper bags, corrected spelling mistakes in his emails, and circled numbers on spreadsheets until the sun came up over the fire escape. When his first company nearly collapsed, she took extra shifts at the gallery, sold the small gold bracelet her mother had given her, and told him it was only money. He cried in the passenger seat of their old Honda that night, ashamed that she had seen him so afraid. Clara had held his hand across the console and said, "We will build it again." She meant we. For years, it was always we. We paid the rent late. We skipped vacations. We celebrated small contracts with grocery store cake and plastic forks. We smiled when friends bought houses in New Jersey and invited them over anyway, pretending not to notice how carefully they looked around the apartment. Then Grant's luck changed. One client became 5. 5 became 20. The navy suit became tailored. The Honda became a black Mercedes. Their dinners moved from corner diners to rooftop restaurants where the menus had no prices and the women laughed softly behind diamond earrings. At first, Clara thought success would make him lighter. Instead, it made him careful about what stood beside him. He began correcting her in public. Not loudly, Never enough for anyone to call it cruel. He would touch her elbow when she spoke too simply, smile tightly when she ordered the wrong wine, and say afterward, "You have to understand the rooms I am entering now." The first time he called her plain, he wrapped it in concern. The second time, he called it honesty. By the end, he did not need to say it at all. She could feel it when he looked at her closet, her hands, her quiet face in the bathroom mirror while he adjusted his cufflinks. The divorce papers arrived on a rainy Thursday, delivered by a man who could not meet her eyes. Grant said it was better to end things before they began to resent each other, as if resentment had not already been living in the house, wearing his cologne, answering to his name. He offered her money. She refused most of it, not because she was proud in a foolish way, but because she had already given enough of her life to be paid for leaving it. Now, across the ballroom, Grant stood beside Brielle as if Clara had been a mistake corrected by a better choice. But Clara remembered the man he had been before the room learned his name. And worse for him, she remembered the woman who had carried him there. Brielle did not stop because the first laugh had worked. She stepped a little closer to Clara, close enough for the photographers near the cake table to turn their lenses, close enough for the women at the front tables to lower their voices and lean in. The bride was beautiful in the way money could polish beauty until it looked almost untouchable. Her gown swept behind her like white smoke. Her diamond earrings moved when she tilted her head, and her smile had the careful softness of someone pretending not to enjoy being cruel. "You have to understand," Brielle said to the guests, placing one hand over her heart as if she were explaining kindness. "I admire Clara. Really, I do. It takes courage to come here alone, after everything." A man at table 6 gave a small laugh into his drink. Someone else whispered, "That is Grant's ex-wife." Clara heard it without turning. She had spent years learning how to hear what people try to hide. The question under the question. The judgment dressed as curiosity. The pleasure people took when a woman who had once been chosen appeared to have been replaced. Brielle lifted her bouquet, white roses tied with silk ribbon, then nodded toward the gift table beside Clara. "We did not put her on the seating chart at first," she continued, her voice sweet enough to pass through the room without resistance. "I thought it might be painful for her. But Grant said Clara always knew how to behave." Grant's jaw tightened, not from shame, but from inconvenience. He looked toward the band, toward the planner, toward anywhere except Clara. Once, that look would have made her shrink. Once, she would have tried to rescue him from the discomfort he had created. She would have smiled for him, explained for him, softened the edges of his choices so no one would think badly of him. Not tonight. Tonight, she let him stand inside his own silence. Brielle reached for Clara's bare left hand with the lightest touch, turning it upward for the nearest bridesmaid to see. "No ring mark anymore," she said. "That is good. Healing looks different on everyone." The bridesmaid pressed her lips together, half amused, half embarrassed. Clara did not pull away quickly. She let the room look. Her fingers were steady. Her nails were short, pale, clean. There was no diamond, no bracelet, no symbol expensive enough for these people to respect. Only the faintest shadow where the old ring had once sat, a small private ghost under the ballroom lights. "I hope you find someone someday," Brielle added, lowering her voice as if offering mercy. "Someone who fits the life you can actually live." That was the moment the laughter became thinner. Even the people enjoying the scene seemed to sense that Brielle had stepped past elegance and into something smaller. Grant finally said her name. Brielle. Not Clara's name. Hers. A warning for the bride, not an apology to the woman in front of him. Clara looked at him then, fully, calmly, and Grant's face changed for half a second. He saw no tears, no pleading, no old wife waiting to be noticed. He saw a woman standing in a room built to humiliate her, and somehow the room was beginning to look ashamed before she did. Clara gently took her hand back and folded it over her purse. Inside, beneath the satin lining, the black velvet box rested against her palm like a secret with a heartbeat. She did not open it. She did not need to. Beyond the gold doors, footsteps moved across the marble lobby, measured and certain. The hotel manager's voice dropped into a respectful hush. One by one, people near the entrance began to turn. The weight of the velvet box against Clara's palm did not feel like rescue. It felt like proof of everything she had survived before anyone thought to applaud her. After the divorce, there had been no dramatic exit, no crowd waiting outside the courthouse, no movie rainstorm to make her pain look beautiful. There was only a cardboard box on the passenger seat, a rental apartment on the fourth floor of a narrow building in Brooklyn, and a silence so large she could hear the refrigerator hum at night. She had $43 in cash the first evening, 2 lamps that did not match, and a folding table she used as a desk until she could afford something better. The first winter was the hardest. Heat clicked through the pipes like an old man coughing. Snow gathered along the window ledge. Clara wore socks to bed and answered client emails before sunrise, because dignity did not pay rent unless she gave it working hours. She took inventory for small galleries, arranged private art viewings, wrote catalog notes for collectors who sometimes forgot to thank her, and carried framed canvases up 3 flights of stairs because hiring movers cost too much. Her hands, the same hands Brielle had displayed, like evidence of failure, learned to build a life one practical motion at a time. They signed contracts on borrowed office paper. They repaired loose frames with tiny brass nails. They poured coffee into chipped mugs at 6 in the morning. They wiped rain from her coat after late meetings in Manhattan. They counted bills on the kitchen counter and set aside enough for rent, groceries, subway fare, and one small bouquet of grocery store tulips every Friday, because Clara refused to let survival become the only decoration in her life. People assumed she had disappeared because Grant's world stopped seeing her. In truth, she had become visible somewhere else. Quietly, then steadily, her little consulting studio began to grow. A retired curator recommended her to a nonprofit auction. A young artist trusted her with a first serious sale. A widowed collector asked her to value a private estate in Connecticut, and Clara drove 3 hours each way in a used sedan with a cracked cup holder and a folder full of careful notes. She never spoke badly of Grant in those rooms. Not because he deserved protection, but because her new life did not need his shadow to explain itself. Slowly, her name began moving through circles that valued discretion more than noise. Clara Hayes was precise. Clara Hayes was fair. Clara Hayes saw worth where other people saw dust, age, or inconvenient history. That was the work that brought her to a charity preview on the Upper East Side one rainy April evening, where a forgotten painting leaned against a back wall with the wrong price card beneath it. A man in a charcoal overcoat stood beside it, watching as Clara quietly corrected the listing before the auction opened. He asked why she cared so much about a piece no one was fighting for. Clara remembered looking at the painting, then at the man, and saying, "Because value does not disappear just because the room overlooks it." The man had smiled, not like Grant smiled when he wanted approval, but like someone hearing a language he already understood. His name was Alexander Westbrook, and long before he ever offered her a ring, he was the first person who looked at her empty hands and saw everything they had carried. Alexander Westbrook did not enter Clara's life like a man trying to save a woman. He entered it like a man willing to stand still long enough to see what everyone else kept walking past. At the charity preview, he did not ask whether she was married. He did not ask who had hurt her. He did not offer a compliment polished enough to sound expensive. He simply stood beside the mislabeled painting while rain tapped softly against the tall windows and asked, "How did you know?" Clara looked at the small signature in the lower corner, nearly hidden beneath old varnish, and explained that the artist had changed his initials during the last 2 years of his life, after his wife died and his work became quieter. Alexander listened without checking his phone. That alone felt unusual. In Grant's world, people listened only until it was their turn to be admired. Alexander listened as if silence had value too. Over the next months, he appeared in rooms where Clara worked, never too often, never with pressure. At a private estate sale in Greenwich, he watched her stop a collector from underpaying an elderly owner who did not understand what she had inherited. At a museum fundraiser in Boston, he saw her step away from a table of donors to help a nervous young artist fix a crooked display tag. At a small gallery in Soho, he heard her defend the price of a canvas everyone else dismissed because the painter had no famous last name. "You protect things people underestimate," he said one evening as they walked 3 blocks under a shared umbrella because the cab line was too long. Clara gave him a cautious smile. Someone should. He did not laugh. He did not make it romantic. He only nodded, as if she had just told him the most important thing about herself. Alexander was already known in places Clara had only recently been invited into. His company owned hotels, private residences, and art storage facilities from New York to Los Angeles. His name moved quietly through bank offices, boardrooms, and charity boards. But he wore power like a dark coat, not a costume. He never corrected waiters. He never announced what he paid for anything. When Clara spoke, he turned toward her fully. When she paused, he waited. When she said no, he accepted it without turning cold. That was how trust began, not with fireworks, but with small moments that did not ask her to shrink. The first time he visited her Brooklyn studio, he noticed the folding table before he noticed the view. By then, Clara could have afforded a better desk, but she had kept it in the corner as a reminder of the woman who had started over with invoices stacked beside instant coffee. Alexander ran one hand lightly along its chipped edge and said, "This is where you rebuilt." Clara looked away because some truths felt more intimate than praise. He did not touch her. He did not fill the silence. He let her keep her dignity in her own hands. And that was why, when Grant's wedding invitation arrived in a thick ivory envelope 2 weeks later, Clara did not throw it away. She placed it on that same folding table and stared at her former name printed beneath his new one. Alexander read the invitation once, then set it down carefully. "You do not owe them your presence," he said. Clara looked at the black ink, at the embossed address of the Meridian Hotel, and whispered, "No. But I owe myself the chance to stop disappearing." Alexander's eyes changed then, not with anger, but with decision. He already knew something Clara did not yet know. The Meridian was no longer just a hotel. It was his. Alexander did not tell Clara about the Meridian right away. He let the invitation sit between them on the folding table, ivory paper against chipped wood, past life against rebuilt life, while rain traced thin lines down the studio windows. Clara expected him to say what everyone else would have said. "Do not go. They do not deserve you. Let the past bury itself." But Alexander had never mistaken protection for control. He stood near the window, one hand in the pocket of his charcoal coat, and asked, "What would going there give you?" Clara looked at the embossed address until the letters blurred. "Not revenge," she said slowly. "I am tired of revenge being the only language people understand. I just want to walk into a room where they think I should lower my eyes and not lower them." Alexander nodded once, as if she had answered a question larger than the wedding. The next evening, he drove her through Manhattan in a quiet black car while the city shone wet under streetlights. They passed Fifth Avenue windows, town cars, yellow cabs, couples waiting outside restaurants with menus posted in brass frames. Clara watched her reflection in the glass, older than the woman Grant had left, calmer than the woman who had signed the papers, and strangely unafraid. Alexander stopped outside a small jeweler on Madison Avenue after closing time. The owner unlocked the door for him personally and greeted Clara with the kind of respect that did not ask who she belonged to. Inside, there were no crowds, no bright sales pitch, only velvet trays under warm lamps and the soft tick of an antique wall clock. Clara understood before Alexander opened the case. "I did not come here for that," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That is why I brought you." He chose nothing for her. He watched while she looked, then looked away, then returned to one ring resting at the edge of the tray. It was not the largest. It did not need to be. A clean oval diamond sat on a thin platinum band, bright without shouting. Clara stared at it for a long time, and what tightened in her chest was not excitement. It was memory. Grant's ring had once felt like a promise. Later, it had become a receipt for everything she had given without being seen. Alexander seemed to understand the hesitation before she named it. "This is not proof that you are worth choosing," he said. "You were worth that before I knew your name." Clara touched the edge of the velvet tray, not the ring. "Then why give it to me?" He answered quietly, "Because someday, in some room, someone will try to decide what your hands mean. And if you allow me, I would like to answer with you." Clara did not wear it when they left. She placed the black velvet box in her purse and carried it home like a secret flame. On the morning of the wedding, she dressed alone in her Brooklyn apartment. No stylist, no audience, no borrowed confidence. She chose the champagne dress because it did not beg for attention. She pinned her hair low, added pearl earrings, and left her left hand bare. When Alexander arrived, he looked at her hand first, then her face. "Are you sure?" he asked. Clara closed her purse over the velvet box. "Let them see what they think is empty." Only then did Alexander tell her the truth. His company had finalized the purchase of the Meridian 3 days earlier. The ballroom, The marble staircase, the gold doors, every crystal glass on every white-clothed table, all of it now belonged to the man standing in her doorway. Clara was silent for a breath, then almost smiled. You knew Grant booked it there. Alexander held her gaze. I knew. But tonight is not about him. Hours later, as Brielle displayed Clara's bare hand beneath the chandeliers, Clara felt that same velvet box resting against her palm. She had not come to be rescued. She had come to be witnessed. And now, beyond the gold doors, the room was beginning to turn. For one long second, the ballroom did not understand why the air had changed. The band was still playing near the marble staircase. The champagne was still rising in thin gold bubbles, and Brielle was still standing with Clara's bare hand between them, as if it were a prize she had just won. But attention has a sound when it moves. It begins with a pause, then a murmur, then the quiet shift of expensive shoes turning toward the same direction. Near the gold doors, the hotel manager had stopped beside the entrance, his posture suddenly straighter, his face careful in the way employees become careful around power. Clara felt it before she looked. Brielle felt it too, and because she did not understand it, she tried to take the room back. Well, the bride said with a bright laugh that landed too hard. I hope we are not making you uncomfortable, Clara. This is still a celebration. Grant looked from Brielle to the entrance, then back again, the first thread of unease crossing his polished face. He had built his new life on rooms like this, where every person mattered only as much as their title, their checkbook, or the door they could open. He knew the rhythm of influence. He knew when a room began making space for someone important. Clara kept her hand on her purse, thumb resting over the hidden seam where the velvet box pressed against the lining. She did not turn yet. She let Brielle finish. The bride lifted her bouquet and smiled toward the guests as if asking them to join her one more time. Honestly, I think Clara deserves credit, she said. Some women would have stayed home. Some women would not want to watch their ex-husband marry someone who actually matches his life now. A few people laughed, but the sound was weaker. A woman at the front table glanced toward the entrance and forgot to smile. A man in a navy suit lowered his glass without taking a sip. Brielle noticed, and irritation flashed beneath her makeup for the first time. She stepped closer to Clara, voice sweet but tighter. You always were quiet. Grant told me that. Loyal, simple, easy to please. There is nothing wrong with that. It is just not enough for certain men. Grant's eyes flicked sharply to Brielle. This time, he was not warning her because she had gone too far with Clara. He was warning her because too many people were now listening. Clara looked at him and saw the old pattern in perfect form. He did not mind cruelty. He minded witnesses. Brielle, he said softly, his smile fixed. Let it go. But Brielle had mistaken the silence for permission all night, and now she mistook his discomfort for embarrassment over Clara. Why? She asked, turning her diamond toward the lights again. I am only saying what everyone is thinking. She walked in here with nothing. No husband. No ring. No place at the table unless we gave her one. The words hung in the ballroom, naked at last, stripped of charm. Even the chandeliers seemed colder above them. Clara finally looked toward the gold doors. The hotel manager stepped aside. Two security staff lowered their heads with quiet respect. A tall man in a charcoal suit entered, calm as midnight over the Hudson. He did not scan the crowd for approval. He did not hurry. He simply walked forward, and with every step, the room seemed to remember how to be silent. Grant's face lost its color before Brielle knew why. Clara breathed once, slow and steady, and let her bare hand rest over the black velvet box. Alexander Westbrook crossed the marble floor with the quiet certainty of a man who had never needed applause to prove he belonged anywhere. The ballroom parted for him slowly, not because he asked, but because recognition moved faster than footsteps. A woman near the front table whispered his name behind her hand. A venture capitalist who had laughed at Brielle's joke lowered his glass as if the crystal had suddenly grown heavy. Grant stared at Alexander the way a man stares at a number on a contract he once ignored until it begins deciding his future. Clara did not move toward him. She simply stood beside the gift table, one hand resting on her purse, her face calm beneath the chandelier light. Alexander stopped in front of her and looked only at her, as though the bride, the groom, the guests, the flowers, and the towering wedding cake had all fallen behind glass. Are you all right? He asked softly. Not loudly enough for a performance, but clearly enough for the nearest tables to hear. Clara's answer was a small nod. Brielle blinked once, then smiled with the brittle confidence of someone trying to fit power into a shape she understood. "I am sorry," she said, lifting her chin. "Are you a guest of the hotel?" The manager at the entrance stiffened. Before Alexander could answer, the older man stepped forward and bowed his head. "Mr. Westbrook owns the Meridian, Mrs. Carson. The transfer was completed this week." The room went so still that the band lost its rhythm for half a measure. Brielle's smile did not vanish all at once. It faded slowly, like light leaving a window. Grant took one step forward. "Alexander," he said, "too familiar and too late. I did not realize you were attending." Alexander finally looked at him. There was no anger in his face. That made it worse. "I was invited by Clara." 2 words, and the whole room shifted again. Clara was no longer the woman standing near the gift table because someone had allowed her a seat. She was the reason the most powerful man in the building had walked through those doors. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. He had met Alexander twice in boardrooms where polished tables reflected nervous faces. Westbrook Capital held the private financing package Grant's company needed to survive its expansion. Grant had rehearsed charm for him. He had memorized figures for him. He had never imagined Clara knew him beyond a newspaper photograph. Brielle looked from Alexander to Clara, then down at the bare hand she had mocked minutes earlier. Alexander saw the movement. Clara did too. For the first time all night, she opened her purse. The sound of the clasp was small, but every person seemed to hear it. She removed the black velvet box and held it between her fingers. No flourish, no trembling, just a quiet object carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. Alexander took it from her with permission in his eyes. "May I answer them now?" he asked. Clara breathed in, remembering the apartment in Queens, the rain on the Brooklyn window, the folding table, the years of being measured by what others refused to see. Then she gave the smallest smile. "Yes." Alexander opened the box. The diamond caught the chandelier light and scattered it across the white tablecloths like a sentence the room could not interrupt. He took Clara's left hand, the same hand Brielle had displayed as proof of emptiness, and held it with care so gentle it made the cruelty around them look cheap. When he slid the ring onto her finger, no one spoke. Not Grant, not Brielle, not the guests who had laughed too soon. Clara looked down at the ring, then at her own hand beneath it. It did not feel like being chosen in front of the room. It felt like finally being seen by someone who had never needed the room to approve her. For a moment, the ring seemed to hold the entire ballroom still. It caught the chandelier light, threw it softly across Clara's fingers, and turned every careless laugh from minutes before into something people suddenly wanted to forget. Brielle stood with her bouquet lowered, her face pale beneath the careful glow of makeup, watching the hand she had mocked become the center of the room, without Clara raising her voice once. Grant looked at the ring, then at Alexander, then at Clara, as if trying to rearrange the scene into a version where he still understood his place in it. But nothing moved for him anymore. Not the room, not the silence, not the woman he had spent years teaching himself to underestimate. Alexander released Clara's hand slowly, not because he was letting her go, but because he wanted the room to see that she stood on her own. The hotel manager remained near the gold doors, respectful and quiet. At the front table, Grant's banker leaned toward another man and whispered something that made both of them look away from the groom. Brielle noticed. Grant noticed. Clara noticed too, but she did not smile at their discomfort. That would have made the moment smaller than it was. Grant stepped forward at last, his voice polished thin. "Clara, I think we should talk." The sound of her name in his mouth did not hurt the way it used to. It felt distant, like an old song playing from another apartment. Clara looked at him and remembered the rainy Thursday, the papers, the boxes, the way he had offered money as if it could turn sacrifice into a clean transaction. She remembered pressing his navy suit, counting rent in ones and twenties, watching him learn to be ashamed of the woman who had believed in him first. Then she looked at Brielle, who held her diamond hand close to her chest now, no longer displaying it. Clara could have explained everything. She could have told the room about the years, the debt, the proposals she edited, the private humiliation hidden beneath public charm. She could have told them that her hands had never been empty, that they had carried a marriage, a company, a broken heart, and then an entire life rebuilt from scratch. But the truth did not need to beg for space. It was already standing there in a champagne dress, wearing a ring that had not been given to purchase her worth, only to honor what had always been there. "There is nothing left to discuss, Grant," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it reached farther than Brielle's laughter ever had. Grant swallowed, and for the first time that night, he looked less like a groom and more like a man realizing the past had witnesses. Alexander offered Clara his arm. She took it, not as escape, not as performance, but as choice. Together, they walked toward the gold doors while the guests stepped aside, the same people who had watched her stand alone now making room for her departure. At the threshold, Clara paused and looked back once. Not at Grant, not at Brielle, at the ballroom itself, glittering and cold, full of people who had mistaken silence for weakness because they had never seen dignity hold its ground. Then she turned away. The band did not know whether to continue. The cake remained untouched. The flowers looked too white beneath the lights. Outside, the Manhattan night waited beyond the glass doors, clean with recent rain. Clara stepped into it with her hand resting lightly at her side, the diamond catching the city lights with every movement. She had not ruined the wedding. She had only allowed the truth to arrive dressed better than revenge. And behind her, in the ballroom Grant had chosen to prove he had moved on, everyone finally understood that Clara Hayes had been the one who truly left first.